Welcome to Innovation Dialogue. I'm Diana Ding.
My voice.
My story.
My dream.
Innovation Dialogue.
We are encouraged by their story.
Where you got your financing chops. So why did you start in 1955, and what is your investment thesis?
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I was on Sand Hill Road for more than 10 years, bouncing around different offices with Lightspeed and Khosla. But nice to be in Los Altos, which is a different breath of fresh air. When I was at Lightspeed and Khosla, I had the opportunity to do two things that were perhaps a bit different. First was I was investing in a lot of sectors that weren't part of the mainstream on Sand Hill Road, so not e-commerce, not social media, not software, but rather what I call save the world sectors, like energy, environment, food, agriculture, health. When I was at Lightspeed, you could have considered me the Lightspeed X guy because I was doing a lot of investments in these categories. And during that time, we were lucky as a firm to invest in companies like Nest Labs, Solazyme, Solar Edge, and a bunch of others that ended up being unicorn companies in an area that typically has been very difficult to invest in. And then I carried that over to Khosla when I was a GP there for 5 years. I was investing in the same sector. So that was one thing that was perhaps a bit different about my experience. The second was that I was spending a lot of time thinking about how to make these companies, some in the clean tech area, sustainability, others in new health tech, trying to find different ways to help them commercialize. And again, China, Asia came up. Many of the companies that had difficulties finding financing or partnerships in the U.S. Were seeing a lot of interest in China, partners coming over from the other side of the Pacific to partner, invest, in some cases acquire. And so over that time at Khosla, I was able to help a number of our portfolio companies build bridges to Asia. And so in 2015, the observation that I made was, boy, as much as I love the other 5 partners and my experience at Khosla, there was a big opportunity and wide open space to be very razor-sharp focused on investing in U.S. and European technology companies that can solve some of these challenges in China and Asia and use that as the key criteria for making an investment. And so 1955 was born. And it very much builds on the kind of eclectic and unique experience that I've had over the last 10, 12 years on Sand Hill Road. And it is specifically around identifying a number of these challenges that these developing countries face. And its energy and environmental issues are very well known. Access to healthcare, safe food and agricultural practices. A lot of the technologies in the U.S. and Europe happen to be very disruptive, coming out of the various universities and startups here that can be brought to bear to solve some of these challenges. And so if you can match these entrepreneurs with countries that have survival-driven demands and a lot of capital, a lot of government support, you can create a model that hopefully will be good for the world, but also generate outsized financial returns. And so that was my motivation.
Great. And Andrew, your fund was pretty big. It's 200 million, so that's a sizable first fund. So how do you make the connection between European and Silicon Valley companies or US-based companies and your partners in China?
Well, I think part of it was having spent a number of years on Sand Hill looking at these areas and frankly, staying in the business. I've had the luxury of seeing thousands of companies in US and Europe across these categories that, frankly, these days are quite underserved. Everyone's sort of chasing the next Snapchat. My Lightspeed friends are obviously very happy about that one. And a number of other companies, but not as many are chasing after these. And so, a lot of the U.S. and European companies that I've had the pleasure of getting to know over that last decade, many of them have grown up. They have a product now. They're ready to commercialize, but for whatever reason, it's harder to do so in the U.S. And so, being able to match them with different partners on the other side of the Pacific and really generating that kind of excitement, I think is very important. So from the U.S. and European side, a lot of it comes from the connections that we've built over time. And then on the China side, we, by creating a brand where we're an American firm, but one that has this type of cross-Pacific focus, we've been able to attract a lot of different partners in China and Asia that are interested in the pipeline and deal flow that we have. And in some cases, they're involved with the funds or a strategic partner, and that way we're able to hopefully build those bridges and convince the American entrepreneur that we have some experience and credibility in creating that kind of trusted partnership that isn't as common these days. It's not that straightforward to do that kind of U.S.-China or U.S.-Asia partnership.
Got it. So next, Jun Lee from Wisemont Capital. So similarly to Andrew's firm, you were founded fairly recently in 2015. You moved from Seattle, where you had experience at Microsoft, to the Bay. Your fund is, I think, 15 million, the first fund that you raised?
Yeah, 15 million.
And so you're focused very much on the seed stage. So what is your role in the ecosystem here in the Valley?
Great question. Thank you. Sorry for being late. So our fund was founded in late 2015, and we aimed at the early stage investment, mostly in the 2B technology startups. And our special value to our portfolio companies, we bring the large resources from China. Because if you look at the founder team, myself, I worked for Microsoft in the US, and then I actually helped a Chinese company to grow their US market. My co-founder founded a big data company and later sold it to a global company. And the other partners in my team actually have started either the company in China. They actually spend a significant time in U.S. and then start a company in China or vice versa. So they have a really kind of a first-hand operation experience of dealing with cross-border innovation and startups. So the unique value we bring to our portfolio company is we bring the first-hand experience, operation experience, and we also bring the additional capital and a policymaker, who are really familiar how to deal with the China environment. Most of our team members have spent, over 20 years in U.S., but they grew up in China. So they really understand the both market. So comparing to what Andrew says, fundamentally, I believe if you really truly want to help the company to do the cross-border, you definitely need to have the first-hand experience, and you definitely have to understand both market very well.
Yeah. Susan, over to you. So Susan joined Crunch Fund over a year ago. The firm's been around since 2011, and you have done, the firm has done, I think, you have over 180 portfolio companies, so a huge network. So how do you position yourselves in the ecosystem?
So, little known fact for the rest of you, Janae and I worked together for 4 years when I was at TechCrunch. And she was plodding away over there, having been there since the beginning. So it's really a pleasure to be here with you. So Crunch Fund was started in 2011 and really looked at being vertical agnostic and approaching it from a founder that has like a mission-driven company. So a problem that they've had, things of that sort.
Yep.
And really looking at something that's at venture scale, that has defensible IP, and that we're excited about as a group. So that's our criteria when we come into investing. The fact that we are vertical agnostic has given us an opportunity to create those kinds of collisions within our portfolio that one might not get elsewhere. And so I really feel like that's the value add there. For me, it was a comfortable place to join with my previous experience, both in startups myself and then at TechCrunch and subsequently Y Combinator. It was a natural progression in what I had been doing and identifying trends and seeing what things excited me. So that's where it went for me.
Okay. And next up, I want to introduce Duncan Davidson. So Duncan, you said to me 2010 was a great year to start Bullpen Capital, and you define yourself as doing post-seed investing. So tell us about Bullpen and what you guys are up to.
Thank you. To answer your original question, what changed? It's the era of cheap. Bullpen was formed to take advantage of this. TechCrunch has actually covered this extremely well, but I had 2 startups in the 90s. One of them had to raise $10 million Another had to raise 20 million just to get going. Now, fortunately, both went public, so it all worked out. We had to go to a Series A fund on Sand Hill Road. By 2005, I was in one of these big funds, actually $4.5 billion, a really big fund. We began seeing that the people coming in only wanted 500,000, not 5 million, not 10 million. A big fund can't write a small check. And this got so interesting, by 2010, people were starting things in dorm rooms on $50,000. They used open source, they used Amazon Web Services, era of cheap. Now, this has created the greatest disruption in venture capital in its history, at least since about 1978. I don't know how many of you were around more than 10 years ago in the industry, but the way the industry is now is quite different than what it used to be. First of all, you don't go to a Series A fund anymore for your first institutional money. They're too big. You go to a seed fund, an institutional seed fund, a crunch fund, or somebody like that. So here's what we saw mathematically. There were 1,000 Series A funds in 2000 at the peak of the bubble. By 2010, there were fewer than 100 left that were still active. A huge change. They had all gotten big. They were $400, $500 million for the most part. And they didn't want to write a small check. They liked to write 10. They might go to 6, 7, 8, pushed into it. They want to write 10. The seed industry was funding at the time $750, $1 million. So we realized there was an efficiency gap. It's not really smart to go from $1 million to a 10 million check. It's just too big a leap, and it's not efficient use of capital. And a lot of companies that did that spent the money, flamed out. It's much smarter to take the small A round, $3 million, $4 million. So we call post-seed is like an early A round. And the graduation rate after bullpen is really, really high.
And your firm's a little bit different to the other firms here because you're more of an investment bank and you're focused on M&A, but you're focused on companies here in the US and linking with China. So tell us about who and what you are, because I looked for your website, I can't even find it. You're not on Crunchbase yet, so tell us about yourselves.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jinpei Li. I'm the founding partner of Light Fusion Capital, also the venture partner of F50. So it's a great pleasure for me to both participate in this panel and also to welcome every one of you to join this event. So Light Fusion Capital is a newly founded boutique investment banking firm for cross-border M&A and investment between US and China. We just founded early this year, and we're still in stealth mode, but we're already working on some deals. Since 2013, there is a big bunch of Chinese investors came to Silicon Valley to do investment. So we feel the trend. Myself first organized a cross-border accelerator to help startups here to raise funding in China to meet hundreds of Chinese investors. Then I realized there's a bigger potential in M&A. In last year alone, Chinese outbound M&A activities in the US totally is $60 billion. This year, there is some regulation, so there are some hurdles, but we believe there is a great potential in cross-border activities. So Light Fusion Capital try to catch this opportunity and help everyone here in the Silicon Valley, in the US, to find great partners in China. Not only financial partners, but also strategic partners. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. So moving on, what I'd love to understand is what I hear a lot from people out there in the Valley is that venture has become extremely conservative, that they're very focused on traction. And so I'd love to know at the seed stage, sort of what sectors are hot and what milestones are you looking for in the companies that approach you?
I mean, first of all, to go off of traction, what you were saying, much to what you had said about how much it costs to start a company, you can find traction for very little money or no money. And so when you're coming for that seed stage investment, having gained some traction, even if it's with a small group of people and have them really love what you're doing, makes a world of difference to somebody just coming with a binder full of ideas. So traction is important. And it can be done for little or no money. So that is why I think it's fair to say that you should come with some traction even when you're looking for a seed investment.
Got it. Duncan?
Janae, you're making an assumption I'd like to challenge. So in the 80s, microprocessor generated the PC revolution. You had to do real good science and chips and things like that. In the 90s, if you did that, you'd lose money. Now you're doing networking and .coms. The iPhone is a seminal invention of this era. So the right thing now, as Susan said, is start something cheap, get it out on the marketplace, either on mobile or the internet, and you get real feedback as to how you're doing. Doing science projects in core tech is not appropriate right now. It's like doing PC stuff in the 90s. Now, I want to say to everybody about the global thing. I've been around the world recently. I've been to Shenzhen a couple times. Wonderful place. The global startup culture is quite similar everywhere in the world. China is an amazing place, I must say. I'm really impressed. But, this is the big but, if they don't follow this modality, this modality of get it out quickly, get traction, they'll have a hard time getting funded. If they do, it doesn't matter who they are. Back in the 90s, you had to come from Apple or HP, have pedigree to get money from a Series A fund. Now, nobody cares. Your performance in the real world is your resume. You don't have to have pedigree. It's a fantastic democratization of startups.
So, Andrew, is that what you're seeing? Because for deep tech, does that work?
I think that type of traction that we're looking for is a little bit different. If you're dealing with things where there's a science component to it, or you're dealing with a more industrial type of product, then what we typically would be looking for is, for a given cost performance spec, there are companies out there that would be drooling over partnering with you. Right. So whether we're talking about a solar or battery storage company, or an agricultural supplement, or a new type of food technology, what we tend to do is understand whether companies have heard about what you're doing, and they're all sort of lining up to really dig in and understand whether there is a partnership opportunity. We just announced 2 weeks ago an investment in a company called Gridtential, which is developing a next generation lead acid battery, where all the non-active material is made with silicon. It's 5x longer lifetime than a typical lead acid battery. They have hundreds of these units out there in the wild. And the type of traction that really got us going was there were 4 strategic investors that were willing to partner with us in this round cooperatively. Right? That's very rare. Usually you'll be lucky if you can get 1 strategic investor involved to play nicely without special terms. Here were 4 battery manufacturers that had gotten their hands on some of the technology that were excited enough not just to say that we might do a JV or we might do a JDA, but we're going to actually put real money in so that we can have a front row seat. So this company hasn't raised a ton of money. They've raised less than $10 million to get to this level. So being scrappy and using the resources that you have to get the attention of the enterprise customers in your field to show that there's some kind of market validation and market pull on relatively little capital, I think is something that certainly is attractive for us.
Got it. And Jinli, for you, are you also looking for scrappy and traction? Because that's what I'm hearing from the whole panel.
Well, I think when we talk about the traction, and you also mentioned the investors are actually being more conservative, looking for more tractions, I think we are actually talking about 2 problems here. And one is actually you see investors actually moving towards the later stage. And when they ask, sometimes the A stage, they require certain like 2 million plus or 5 million. We heard like revenue size, and some asking, the users. So I think from that stand, investors are trying to be more realistic, going back to the business fundamental. When you compare it to the 2014, and people just say, hey, we got a huge number, we don't know what the revenue was. And I think from that stand, investors are trying to get back to the more business fundamental and asking, more realistic question. However, because I'm the first, early stage investor, we have to be bold. Because we're looking for technology fundamentally will disrupt the world. And usually we have to look at the technology right now. It seems to be so early, but we have to bet on that. So usually we have to have 3 to 5 years of vision. Hopefully not like too far ahead, so they actually died before being able to generate a sustainable business model. So, for example, we invested this company called Zinbox. They do the IoT security company. They recently successfully raised a Series B led by Dell, $22 million. By that time, we invested 2 years ago. And that is definitely, they don't have any customer. And IoT, people are talking about that, but it's actually at that time there's no real business traction yet. But we take a bet on that company because we look at the team is great. They from Stanford, from Tsinghua. I'm a Tsinghua alumni. I'm proud of it, and I see the whole team actually, very committed to driving this towards that. I think from the early stage, where as an early stage investor, we're willing to bet on a bold idea. However, we also require the team to be really committed to that vision.
Got it. So finally, because we have a final few minutes, I want to open this up to the panel, is given that there are a lot of investors in this room, what are the sectors that you think are particularly interesting or particularly hot right now? And I know when I talked to all of you, you talked about not just following the hot trends because they can be a little overheated and you have a different perspective. So I'd love to throw that out there. Andrew, Duncan, Sue, what are the sectors that you think are interesting right now for your firm?
Well, my perspective is we're going through a transitional period. That what the iPhone created is now mature. And we're beginning to see future technology, so-called frontier technology, coming up. And so I think the style of investing is going to switch a little bit more to core tech and away from sort of fluffy apps because of that. So what we're doing is we're preparing for this. We did a 3D printing deal, which is quite interesting. I've got a blockchain IoT deal and a few others. But fundamentally, it seems really early for that stuff. How many people have done an ICO, invested in ICO? Not really very. How many wish they had? How many think it's a bubble? The thing is, underneath the ICO, the tokens have no real use case. It's just speculative fervor. There's nobody actually using the blockchain for real stuff yet of any substance. That's a few years out. When that happens, then the bell will ring on the blockchain. So I look across all the technologies and think they're 2 to 5 years away before they become real. So we're in this transition where the frontier tech is coming, but not here yet.
To Duncan's, what Duncan said about the blockchain and what you use tokens for and what becomes real, I think now when I look at things that are like that, I think you have to think about something that you would buy a token for that you do not currently have an easy way to pay for that. You don't do it this way right now. So, for instance, when Coinbase, when they integrated with some e-commerce platforms, like, why should I pay for something with Bitcoin when I can easily use my MasterCard? Like, that just doesn't make sense. Why should I use this risky, volatile thing that, God knows what it is when the transaction actually goes through? Or should I use my credit card that works and has worked all along? I think that we've really come up against some things about identity in the blockchain, and I do think that we're going to see stuff in the future that finds that things that we had been talking about actually a few years ago, about how our online identity will be linked to that, will become very important. I think that what happened with Equifax in the last few weeks has proven that.
So Susan, I agree with you. I want to leap in here and do something, a prediction of the future.
Cool.
HTML were the rails on which we built the World Wide Web, the internet for people. I think blockchain is actually going to be the internet for machines, not people. So an example is self-driving car, it's got to park. How does it find a parking garage? How does it get the gate to go out? How does it pay? Perfect blockchain, have parking token. It's a perfect use case. And I think the machines will do a lot more than we imagine in about 5 or 10 years, using the blockchain as the fundamental rails like the World Wide Web.
That's like the coolest soundbite from this panel.
Andrew, you're investing in some interesting tech.
Tough to top that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that my old partner Vinod Khosla used to always say is the way to make outsized returns, whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor or corporate executive, is to be contrarian and to be right. If you're contrarian and you're chasing after an investment area that no one else is chasing after, and you happen to be right about the trend, well, you will be you tend to be the one that gets more of the spoils. So rather than tell you what I think are the hot sectors or the areas where I think you should invest in, I'll call back to a comment that Duncan made earlier, which is the venture industry is going through a ridiculous disruption over the last decade. We are moving away from the 1980s view of asset allocation made by a very small exclusive set of allocators to a very global picture. You have a lot of Chinese, Middle Eastern investors getting into the mix. You have newer models that are coming out for how you allocate those assets. So the traditional view of what a venture capital firm should look like has already been broken and changed. A Series A valuation now is 50 to 100 million bucks in some cases, which is completely different from where it was 10, 15 years ago. So I think for me, what I look at as someone who is quote, an emerging force, I'm trying to reinvent the model. I'm trying to figure out how I can change the venture capital model to support a number of these sectors that I believe in: energy, food, ag, health, education. These are all $100 billion markets where technology hasn't fully disrupted yet. And if there's a way to create an investment strategy in order to support these sectors, then I believe they will become hot. So my prediction is that there are going to be a number of these sectors where there is already a fundamental demand, thinking in the Sequoia mindset of finding a large market that is ripe for disruption. There are a lot of those types of markets, and what will actually change is the way in which people think about doing these types of investments. On this panel, you already heard Duncan has created a different type of seed investment strategy. Crunchbase is a seed investor, which in 2010 was a very new radical concept. Jingpei is developing almost a merchant banking M&A type of model for investing. And for us, we're doing yet a different flavor of this type of cross-border thing that's very different. So you're already seeing that at least the folks who are up here are looking at sectors differently, and we're also trying to innovate on the model for venture that's a bit different. So I think that is really more of what I think is the call of the day. Following the herd and trying to do what everyone else has done, it's already too late for that. There are already a lot of large firms that will outcompete you. But reinventing the model to go after sectors that are large and in desperate need for entrepreneurs and technology, I think is the way to go.
And I think that sums it up. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to the panel. That was great.
Thank you.